Hello everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America.
On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old. An anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, Andrew talks not just about the American past and present, but also speculates on its future. What, Andrew asks, will be the 21st century fate of this now venerable American republic?
Hello everybody, it is Friday, March the 28th, 2025, end of the month. This show will probably go out actually tomorrow, Saturday the 29th. At the beginning of the month, I did a show with one of my favorite pundits from Washington, D.C., Jonathan Rauch, the Brookings scholar, Atlantic writer as well, on a piece that he wrote at the beginning of March for The Atlantic about Trump on patrimonialism. And actually, we did a show with Jeff Kopstein, who's written an interesting book on patrimonialism, and John at the beginning of the month. Everything, of course, has changed to remix Harold Wilson. A month is a long time in politics, especially Trump's America. At the end of the month, there's been a huge scandal associated with John's magazine, The Atlantic. The editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, Jeffrey Goldberg, has been dragged into a scandal about, it's called Signalgate, or the Signal debacle. Lots of interesting pieces about it. And I was struck with Jeffrey Goldberg's appearance on the New York Times podcast a couple of days ago, in which he was very forthright and articulate. John is joining us from Washington, D.C., indeed from his office in Brookings. John, I don't know what you make of the Goldberg case, but it strikes me, I'm not sure if you heard his interview on the New York Times podcast, but it strikes me that the resistance now to Trump and Trumpianism and the authoritarianism that you, more perhaps than anyone, has been warning us about for years, you and Pete Wehner, is now beginning to form. Do you think there's any truth to that?
Yeah, there is some truth to that. We saw finally a Republican senator, Susan Collins of Maine, express reservations about some of what's going on, though those right now look like they're still toothless reservations. And we've seen a few voices say that they're pretty disturbed by the extraordinary, bewildering, almost comical, Ionesco-like inclusion of a journalist and in a secret.
Yeah, you couldn't make this stuff up, John, could you?
Yeah,
I mean, Ionescu, Kafka, nobody could make this kind of stuff up.
Yeah, well, I've been telling my friends that now that we're moving from the realm of George Orwell to the realm of Eugene Ionesco, I'm feeling at least it's a little bit more fun. So the Democrats still don't have a strategy and don't know what to do. And the courts still really haven't figured out which end is up, though they're ruling against Trump. And we still don't know if he'll follow court orders. And he's moving incredibly quickly with the style of rule he's established of all executive orders all the time. What he says goes, period, end of story. So we're still bewildered and we're still chickens with our heads cut off. But yeah, you're right. Things are beginning to take shape a little bit.
Yeah, and I actually don't know Goldberg, but I assume you do. I was really struck with how defiant he was, how articulate and strong, and unwilling to compromise in any way and tell the truth. I mean, obviously, he was put in this weird situation. I mean, he could have, I guess, theoretically ignored the whole thing. He could have gone public, but he navigated between those two extremes. What do you make of Jeffrey Goldberg? They couldn't have picked, it seems to me, on anyone stronger and more resilient. And of course, The Atlantic itself is well financed, beloved by moderates, centrists, progressives. So this is not, he and the Atlantic is not an easy thing to push around, probably in some ways even harder than the New York Times.
Well, Jeff I've known him for years. We're not close social buddies, but I've known him. I've worked for him. He cut his teeth at the New Yorker, and he wrote about Saddam Hussein's gas attacks on the Kurds. This is a war-hardened, seasoned journalist who also is a national security journalist, which means he knows the rules, which means he is not going to be easy to pull the wool over his eyes. And all of those have stood in good stead. And I'm proud of the Atlantic today. And I am proud to be working for a guy against whom the Trump administration smears didn't work.
Yeah, and I share your pride, even if I don't work for the Atlantic. I'm very, very impressed with him and his behavior. What about the actual incident, John? Is it just one more ridiculous scandal, or is this scandal one that might be the straw, perhaps, that breaks the camel's back?
Oh, no chance of that, Andrew. This administration's modus operandi is, if you hit a bump, you keep going. You mow down whatever happens to be in your way. The administration has complete confidence, justifiably so, that there will be little to no blowback among the Republicans who control Capitol Hill. Their attitude will be the Democrats can hoot and holler, but this too will pass. So no, I think that this will be just one of a series of things, which goes to what we talked about with Jeff Kopstein last time, which is the incompetence of this administration.
And the patrimonialism. I mean, you wrote that wonderful piece, One Word Describes Trump, which is based on Jeff and Steve Hanson's excellent book on it. But there's the patrimonialism oozed from the leaks about, these pathetic characters like Hegseth and Vance, who, even when Trump isn't there, are trying to impress him. I mean, it's really bizarre and pathetic, isn't it?
Well, there's I know how you feel about Nazi analogies, and you're right. But there is this phrase that historians use to try to understand the mindset in an authoritarian regime. And it was a German phrase in the Third Reich. Sorry, I'm not comparing anyone to Hitler. But the phrase was working toward the Führer. And the notion was that you've got to anticipate the needs and desires of the guy in charge. You don't await orders. You have to anticipate it. You have to show your loyalty in advance. You have to outdo each other to do that. And I think, you tell me, but the way I read those exchanges, in those text exchanges, was there some of that? Who can be Trumpier than thou? An exception was there were some reservations expressed about aspects of the strategy.
Well, by Vance in his own bizarre way. Although,
very timidly.
Right. I don't know if you've seen the movie Death of Stalin. I mean, it's not just a Nazi thing. That even when Stalin was dying, his henchmen were terrified of him. Even when he died, they seemed to be determined to impress the old dictator. So maybe there's something in that. Yeah, I take your point on the Nazis, and as you know, I'm certainly taking this more seriously than I did a few months ago. But the patrimonialism is really astonishing. The loyalty of these people. Is it just fear, do you think? I mean, are they worried they're going to get purged? They're not going to end up in Siberia or in some hole in the ground. I mean, at worst, they'll just get thrown out and get a job at Brookings.
I think it's probably 80% fear, 20% ideology, or 70-30. I'm guessing here, Andrew. But so the way life is in the Republican Party is, if you are not on Trump's good side, you are out in the cold. If you are out in the cold, it means you lose access to the power that comes with being in the party, but it means more than that. It means that you are likely to be actively harassed, for example, on social media, but also quite possibly on the street. You are vulnerable to being doxxed. You may have people who come to your house. You may get death threats. Most of these people cannot afford bodyguards. Mitt Romney could, but most could not afford that kind of security. And those are hassles that you just don't need. So I think, 70 or 80% of it probably is fear.
So it requires a strong backbone to resist authoritarianism. That's not news. Everyone who's written about that explains it. You linked to a piece in The Unpopulist a couple of days ago about Trump going after the independence of the entire legal profession. But there's an interesting headline in the FT and indeed in the Wall Street Journal today about a couple of big law firms, Wilmer Hale and Jenner and Block, suing the US government back. Speaking of the resistance, on the one hand, of course, it's Jeff Goldberg at The Atlantic. Do you think that the law firms, it seems to me as if the law firms are as well positioned as anyone to fight back? And they rolled over last week, but this week perhaps they're beginning to wake up to the fact that Trump isn't as strong as he thinks he is.
Well, he's very strong in this context, unless and until the courts overturn what he's doing, or what should happen, which is Congress should make what he's doing illegal and say a president can't deny access to federal buildings to people on official business based on what they say about him. Unless that's done, he has a lot of strength. My sense, though, is that they have figured out that he's coming after them one by one in sequence. And that nothing they do or say can really make them safe. Once you give in to the extortionists the first time, you know how this works. They come back for more. Very interestingly and quite spookily, it looks like in the agreement with Paul Weiss, the first big law firm that knuckled under.
A shameful knuckling under, in my view.
Yeah, well, they were at risk of going out of business. The clients were fleeing.
Yeah, but John, for a law firm to go out of business, lawyers just go along and create another partnership. The lawyers aren't going out of business. I mean, these are just fronts for aggregations of lawyers.
Oh, believe me, I'm not defending them. What they did was craven. I'm just trying to get into their psychology, which is, we won't be here to fight tomorrow if the clients all go out the door. The lawyers are all picked off by other firms, and they were the first, right? But the terms of that deal included essentially co-management with Trump and the Justice Department on things like their pro bono clientele. So this is like, when the extortionist walks into your business and says, nice little business here, you're going to give me a cut of the proceeds and you're going to be calling me when you make those crucial business decisions. That's the most chilling thing going on here. They made the same demand of Columbia University, you'll notice. They said, we want receivership of a number of departments of Columbia. We want to run this place.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm convinced by that comparison. I mean, formerly running Columbia University, they wanted to interfere in some of the departments, but that's another issue. I was in Boston this week. My wife, as you know, is a very senior lawyer at Google, and we had a dinner with all her senior lawyer friends, some of whom are at powerful law firms around the country. And I said to them all, it seems a perfect opportunity for all these large law firms to make an agreement, to suggest that we rise and fall together, and that any attack on one is an attack on all of us, because essentially it's an attack on the law. So it seemed to be a perfect opportunity, or it is a perfect opportunity for the law firms to actually resist en masse. Now, I take your point on Paul Weiss, but that was an early example. I wonder if in the long term it's conceivable that resistance, just as resistance is likely to come from the Supreme Court, it will also come from these law firms. Maybe I'm being a little optimistic. And the pushback from all these senior lawyers, when I ask them, is, well, everyone has mortgages to pay and kids to send to college and all the rest of it. But at a certain point, someone has to, or people have to put their own self-interests on the line, don't they, John?
Well, I was just listening to Ann Applebaum in a different podcast talk about this, and Levitsky and Ziblatt, who are political scientists who write
Yeah,
about it.
ex-colleagues of Jeff Kropstein. They were grad
Right.
students.
You probably had them on the show. But what
Yeah, I
people
have.
who know a lot about autocracies say is that what's happening now is what's always happened, which is the fragmenting of opposition. And that's inevitably the case because the rules have changed. No one knows what the new rules are. No one knows where they stand. And it just takes time. It sometimes takes a long time to get organized in the face of this kind of assault. And of course, that's the dilemma. The longer it takes to counter-organize, the more time the regime has, or the government, or whatever it is, to install its new way of doing things. So I think your analysis is of course correct. It's a collective action problem, right? You can pick off the zebras one at a time. You can't pick off the whole herd. The question is whether that kind of organizational work can be done quickly enough to get past the current moment of shock and awe. But I do think that kind of counter-organization will happen. I was actually at a meeting of some activists last week, and one of the things that they were saying is, look, we don't have the strength to stop most of what's going on, but if we can slow it down, if we can buy some time, we've got midterms coming up in 2 years, and if we can put some friction in the gears and slow them up, that'll give us time to organize. And that does seem like the right way to think about it.
Yeah, and I wonder if the resistance is coming in all sorts of different spheres. I mean, I assume Jeff Goldberg and the Atlantic Board are talking to the New York Times and maybe even to the Washington Post. You assume that senior lawyers at all these big firms are talking to one another. What's the mood at Brookings, John?
Brookings is
the supposed neutral platform for expertise.
Well, we think we are pretty neutral, not just supposed neutral, but I take the point. We are definitely on board with liberal democracy. We are definitely.
Well, that goes without saying.
Yeah, we are against autocracy.
And that goes without saying too.
So that's the dilemma is, how much do we stick with our traditional knitting of just doing policy analysis and hoping that Congress and someone pays attention, good ideas for education and foreign policy. And I think we generally will stick to our knitting. I think we don't have a sort of grand scheme to do things differently. We are talking here about doing something that's historically difficult to us because we're a very decentralized place. We're kind of like a university. And that's trying to figure out a collective project that will look at the big picture and do this in an institution-wide way. So, I mean, one may say that's trivial, but it is a way to try to create an institutional response, much akin to what you said earlier, trying to find new ways to operate that bring resources together to focus on these problems.
And someone must be running Brookings, or certainly someone's funding Brookings. Are they talking to the other DC think tanks, the AEIs? And when I walk around DC, that street, what street's Brookings on?
We're on Massachusetts Avenue.
You walk up and down Mass Ave in Washington, D.C. It's a think tank after think tank, all well-funded, all in beautiful buildings. Do you think that, let's say, Trump turned his nasty gaze on Brookings, would some of those other think tanks on Mass Ave come to your help?
Well, it hasn't happened yet, of course. We expect that, this could happen to anybody. That's now become clear. And I have, same thing we've been talking about, Andrew. I have not seen a collective response, at least not yet.
Yeah, I think we will do. You connected on your excellent Blue Sky account to a piece by Jonathan Last. I've known Jonathan for many years. In fact, he published my first piece on Cult of the Amateur. He wrote a piece for the Bulwark called Our Semi-Authoritarian State. You and I have disagreed on this, and I think I'm still slightly skeptical. We're having this conversation. It's on the internet. Anyone can access it. No one's controlling it. No one knows what we're doing. Are we really on the verge, John, of a semi-authoritarian state?
Oh, I think we're probably there. If you say semi-authoritarian, we're not all the way there, but I think the water's
pretty brutal. I mean, how is it manifesting itself?
So, it's a notched slope. It's not a cliff where you go all the way down at once. But the first thing I worry about, which is very significant, is that Congress has effectively absented itself from what's happening. The president has asserted unprecedented powers to essentially run the government single-handedly. First thing he did was take a newly passed law and say, I choose not to enforce it. In fact, I choose to indemnify companies that break it on my own authority. Nothing from Congress. He then said, I can choose not to spend money that Congress has appropriated, and I can choose to spend money Congress has not appropriated. Nothing from Congress. He then set about weaponizing access to federal buildings for law firms. I could go on. You know that you read the newspapers as well as I do. So moving from a 3-branch form of government to a 2-branch form of government, which is where we are at least right now, that's a very big deal in the U.S.
Are we really? I mean, one of the headlines yesterday was he pulled the New York representative from her UN job. I can't remember her. What's her name? Stephanie. I mean, if we really were moving to a 2-institution, quote unquote, democracy, and if Congress was as irrelevant as you're suggesting, why would he do that?
Well, remember, you said semi-authoritarian. So
right, but that's still quite harsh.
Not all the way there. We have to hope that at some point Congress will get alarmed enough to put its foot down. But we've got 2 years before that happens. The reason Trump pulled back Stefanik is that the majorities that the Republicans have in the House are very narrow. And of course, if Democrats get in control, they can make some trouble for him. Now, we don't know how much trouble, and they don't have the Senate, and the Senate is in a position to block anything the House does, which means all a Democratic House could do would be subpoena the president, call hearings, and try to investigate. And we know that Trump defies congressional subpoenas.
Yeah, but at the same time, that would be gridlock unless he just ignored it entirely.
Subpoenas? That's his posture in the first term. He was subpoenaed. He just said, I pay no attention. So this is well along the way. The second question, of course, is what happens with the courts. He hasn't had to openly defy a Supreme Court order. Do you think he will?
No, you're the expert. I'm assuming he would be fearful, and Roberts has made himself quite clear on this, hasn't he? And it's clear that it's still a Roberts court.
I predicted in August of 2022, we may have talked about this on the show, I don't remember, but I predicted that in a second term, he would do what he had not done in the first, which was openly defy a Supreme Court order. That remains my prediction. It's a guess. I could be wrong, but based on his behavior so far, he believes what he said, which is I have Article 1 and it lets, I have an Article 2 and it lets me do anything. That's a different form of government in the United States. And unless more obstacles arise than have arisen so far or appear likely to arise in the near term, that may be the regime we're living with. Still skeptical?
Yeah, I am skeptical. Well, I'm not entirely skeptical. I mean, I realize this is a crisis. It's clear that this is not a normal situation. But the 2 institutions that I still have faith in American democracy, firstly, the judiciary, or certainly the Supreme Court, and then also the military. I'm guessing that there are a lot of very senior military people in this country who are incredibly uncomfortable with what's happening, because if indeed he does defy the Supreme Court, then they're going to get dragged into this, aren't they?
Yeah, Andrew, I think, and
as they did, kind of, during the DC riots in Trump 1.0.
I believe and I hope that you're right about the military. I believe and I hope that you're right about the courts. They've stood firm so far, despite obvious efforts to intimidate judges. The question remains, will the military follow illegal orders if he gives them? And the question remains, will Trump obey a Supreme Court order if it tells him to stop doing what he's doing? And I think it's jump ball on both of those things at this point.
Well, we shall see. What about what's happening in the universities? You linked to a couple of interesting pieces. One about an outrageous arrest of a Fulbright scholar outside Tufts University yesterday or the day before. Does this signify the end of intellectual freedom in the universities, or is he just picking off, or are they just picking off critics of Hamas and this will end?
It's the same model that we're seeing with the law firms. This is the guy who walks into your dry cleaning store and says, "Nice little shop here. Pity if anything happens to it. You're going to pay me some."
Godfather analogy.
Yep. It's exactly what we talked about last time. You're going to pay me some stuff, and you're going to give me a say in your internal affairs. You're going to make some. You're going to let me consult with you before you make some of those key decisions. That's what he demanded of Colombia. It's also exactly the same dynamic that you alluded to earlier, a collective action problem. Colombia is unpopular. It made itself unpopular by allowing some protests that got out of hand, and by being one of the more woke universities, and by letting its Jewish students feel unsafe. And they're smart. They pick unpopular targets. End of intellectual freedom? No, but again, it's just what you said earlier. Can the universities come together in some kind of collective action? There are already lawsuits. Faculty of Columbia, 2 faculty organizations, unions, have filed a lawsuit against what the administration is doing there. But we need more than that. We need to see faculties across the country and universities across the country show more solidarity than they've shown.
Couldn't agree more. It all comes back down to solidarity, faculty, judges, law firm associates, publishers. As a self-described, John, Jewish atheist, or atheist Jew, what do you make of the way in which they're using anti-Semitism in the university? Is there something symbolic about it, or is it just purely coincidental? They'll just use anything to try to persecute their perceived enemies?
Yeah, such an interesting question. I was talking just about this last night. Are they operating in good faith when they use anti-Semitism as the wedge issue to go after universities? I think the answer is no, because I think generally for this administration, the answer to the question, are they operating in good faith, is no. I think what they care most about is what Jeff Kopstein says they care most about, which is themselves. That said, they are smart enough to pick up on issues that are real. It's not like there's no there with anti-Semitism on campus. So I don't think they're on the level, but the issue is on the level. Does that make sense?
Well, and perhaps you just did a book, and we did a show on this about evangelical Christianity, who seem particularly invested in this fear of anti-Semitism. Your book actually got criticized in the Wall Street Journal, which I think is turning out to be a reasonable newspaper in the current situation, and they allowed you a response. How does this connect to evangelical Christianity? You've just written this book, John, about it, called Cross Purposes. Do you think that some evangelicals are beginning to get cold feet over what's happening, or are they cheerleaders in this authoritarianism? I mean, if Jeff Kopstein is right, and it's hard to argue against it. I mean, Trump is defined by his self-interest. He doesn't care about evangelical Christians any more than he cares about atheist Jews.
We have seen no signs in the polls or in voting behavior that evangelicals who voted 80+% for Trump in 2024 and vote 80+% for every Republican presidential candidate since, I think, John McCain, we see no cracks in the alliance between white evangelicals and the Republican Party. Trump, you may have heard the line that Trump famously said, that his supporters were so loyal that he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose their support. What people don't realize is that he said that at an evangelical college, and the other thing, Dort College.
The evangelicals know, though, where Fifth Avenue in New York is.
I think they do. And the other thing he said in that same speech is, if you elect me, you will have power. Remember that. So it's an explicit trade. I will give you the power of my office and you will give me unconditional loyalty and support. And ever since then, that's the bargain that we have seen. And so far, we don't see cracks in it.
Where are we going to see resistance to Trump within the Christian movement? I've got a show with Pete Wehner, who in my view is the conscience of Christian America. Your fellow Atlantic columnist, you've written all sorts of interesting things with him. In fact, I think we first met through a piece you and Pete co-wrote for the New York Times. In your new book, John, Cross Purposes, you look at a new generation of religious thinkers and focus on the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, formerly known as the Mormons. Is it possible that we're going to get resistance to Trumpism in a Christian sense from Salt Lake City? Could that become one of the centers of resistance?
I don't think it will be resistance per se. That's not how churches typically think about these things, at least not their church. But what they are trying to do, and what the Seventh-day Adventist Church, interestingly, is trying to do, and some others, is to try to take the polarization down by creating more room for shared country negotiation, what the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints call a theology of patience, negotiation, and mutual accommodation. And the notion there is if Christians can behave in a more Christ-like way in politics, then maybe we can begin to rebuild some compromise, some civic trust, and so on. So, and I think that's what religions are good at, right? You know, they're probably not going to be in the streets because that's not what they do. What might actually, Andrew, really get them mobilized and energized, though, is if the Trump administration begins dragging fifth graders out of classrooms, arresting them and deporting them, or we've already
that's happening. I mean, my wife has a friend, a school teacher in the Bay Area. She lost a student from Peru, just didn't show up the next day, and so
wow,
that's the reality.
Wow. Okay, so it is happening. The churches minister to illegal, undocumented immigrants. They minister to green card holders. Another thing that we're starting to see, that the Catholic Church has spoken up on immigration and also on the discontinuation of the PEPFAR program, which provides AIDS treatment to millions and millions of Africans. That's just been blown off the map. It's simply not there. And the estimates are something like 1.6 million lives could be lost about that. So at some point, I think consciences will start awakening, at least over some of those more extreme measures, at least if the pro-lifers are really pro-life.
John, you and I were at the Braver Angels event last year in Kenosha, symbolically, because it was halfway, but in Wisconsin, halfway between Milwaukee and Chicago, where the two political conventions were last year. Is this still a place in the world for groups like Braver Angels trying to bring these two Americas back together, or has something changed in the last few months?
I hope so. I
mean, you're a defiant centrist. If anything, you were a member of the old Republican Party, certainly not a hardcore Democrat.
I've always been independent, and I'm a journalist, and I've tried to stay that way. But yes, of course, I've been driven into the arms of opposing what the current Republican Party is doing. I worry, Andrew, about the question you just asked. My friends at Braver Angels say the job is getting tougher as the country gets more polarized, and as people get more frightened, it gets harder to talk to each other. So that makes the job more difficult, and it makes the job more important. But I don't know the answer to your question.
Well, that's one of the nice things I like about Jonathan Rauch. If he doesn't know the answer, he'll tell us. He's the author of Cross Purposes. He's one of the most articulate critics of authoritarianism and Trumpianism in America. John, keep on doing your good work at Brookings. While you're around, I still have faith in American democracy. Thank you so much. We'll check in again in the not too distant future. It's important to have your voice, and I've got your friend Pete Wehner on the show tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrew.